She had been awake since 4 in the morning, kneading dough with flour-dusted hands and a hollow stomach, the kind of hollow that had nothing to do with food. When the cowboy walked in out of the dust and rain and said, "Ma'am, have you eaten?" Clara Whitfield set her jaw and told him yes. It was the same lie she had told herself every morning for 3 years. But this man, this stranger with mud on his boots and something steady in his eyes, pulled out a chair, sat down across from her, and didn't move. If this story touched something in you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Clara Whitfield had not cried at her husband's funeral. That was what the town remembered. Not the flowers she had arranged herself. Not the bread she had baked that same evening, so the mourners would have something warm in their hands. Not the way she had stood at the grave of a man who had married her 14 years earlier, and squeezed her hand exactly twice in all that time, once at their wedding, once when she lost the baby in the 2nd year. What they remembered was that she hadn't cried. Hard woman, they said, and some said it with admiration, and some with pity, and most with the comfortable authority of people who had never had to be hard a day in their lives. What none of them knew, what Clara had never told a single soul in Willow Creek, Kansas, was that she had cried. She had cried in the root cellar alone on the packed dirt floor, with her back against the cold wall and her knees pulled up to her chest for the better part of an hour. She cried not because she missed Robert Whitfield. She cried because she wasn't sure she did, and that grief, the grief of a marriage that was neither bad enough to leave nor good enough to love, sat heavier in her chest than anything the town had buried. That had been 3 years ago. Now she rose before the sun did. She kneaded dough by lamplight. She opened the small bakery on the eastern edge of Willow Creek 6 days a week and sold bread and sweet rolls and the occasional pie to people who thanked her and sometimes didn't. And she kept her books in precise columns with a pen that scratched quietly in the evenings when the town had gone to sleep, and she was the last light burning on that end of the street. She was 27 years old. She was by her own accounting fine. She was also by everyone else's accounting far too large, far too plain, far too quiet, and far too young to be so entirely settled into the particular kind of loneliness that usually took women 50 years of living to accumulate. Clara did not think of herself as lonely. She thought of herself as organized. It was a Thursday morning in April of 1883 when the cowboy walked through her door, and it was raining, which was unusual, and he was tracking mud across her clean floor, which was not acceptable, and he was looking at her like she was something real, which was something she had entirely stopped expecting from strangers. "Morning, ma'am." He pulled the hat from his head. His hair was dark and damp, and his jaw was the kind of jaw that looked like it had been placed there deliberately. He was tall enough that the low beam above the doorframe caught his shoulder as he came through, and he ducked it without thinking, the way a man accustomed to low beams learned to move. "Something smells like it came out of God's own kitchen." Clara put down the towel she was holding and looked at him. She had learned to read men who came through her door. Most of them wanted bread. Some of them wanted to bargain. A handful over the years had wanted things she wasn't selling. This one was different, though she couldn't immediately place how. "Rolls are 2 cents. Bread's a nickel a loaf, coffee's a penny, and I'm almost out. I'll take 2 rolls and whatever coffee you've got left." He moved toward the counter and set his hat on the edge of it with a practiced ease. "Name's Callum Reid. I'm new in town." "I noticed," Clara said. "I know everyone in Willow Creek." "You keep track." "I keep my books," she said, which was true. She turned to pour the coffee. Behind her she heard the stool scrape against the floor as he sat down. "You the widow that runs this place?" She did not turn around. "I'm the woman that runs this place." A beat of silence. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and his voice held nothing she could object to. "Fair enough." She set the coffee in front of him and pushed the rolls across the counter on the small tin plate she used for customers. He picked up one roll and looked at her with the kind of directness that most people in Willow Creek had learned over time not to use on Clara Whitfield, because she had a way of looking back that made you feel examined. "Have you eaten this morning, ma'am?" She blinked. It was such a simple question. It should have been easy. She opened her mouth, and the answer that came out was the answer she always gave. The answer that had calcified into habit somewhere around year 2 of widowhood. "I'm fine, thank you." He picked up the second roll and set it on her side of the counter. "That's not what I asked." Clara stared at the roll. Something about the gesture, the simplicity of it, the presumption of it, the complete lack of ceremony with which he had done it, knocked something sideways in her chest. She picked the roll up and bit into it, and when she set it down, she met his eyes, and she did not know what was on her face, but whatever it was, he looked at it, and then looked back at his coffee with the quiet consideration of a man who understood that some things didn't need to be said aloud. "Good bread," he said. "I made it." "I know." He drank his coffee. "I can tell when someone put care into something." The town of Willow Creek had approximately 430 people in the spring of 1883, and of those 430 people, perhaps a dozen had ever been genuinely kind to Clara Whitfield, without wanting something in return. The rest existed on a spectrum from indifferent to actively unkind, and at the far end of that spectrum, in the territory Clara privately labeled as the place where decency went to die, lived a woman named Harriet Toombs. Harriet Toombs was the wife of the largest cattle broker in 3 counties. She had a voice that carried the way a church bell carried, not because it was beautiful, but because it was loud, and it echoed, and there was nothing you could do about it once it started. She had opinions about everything, and reservations about nothing, and of all the topics that engaged her interest, none engaged it quite so thoroughly as the character, the appearance, and the romantic prospects of Clara Whitfield. It was Harriet who had sat at the church social 4 months after Robert Whitfield's funeral within earshot of Clara and approximately 16 other women. Poor thing. Can you imagine being that size, and that alone? There isn't a man in this county would take that on. She'd best pray the bakery stays profitable. Clara had heard every word. She had continued ladling punch into cups and saying thank you when someone handed one back to her, and that evening she had felt the particular emptiness that comes when you have run out of the energy to be hurt by the same cruelty twice. She had also quietly, and without telling anyone, raised her prices for the Toombs household by 4 cents per loaf. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Callum Reid did not know any of this when he walked into town that Thursday morning. He knew only what he could see: a woman running a bakery alone, a clean establishment, the smell of good bread, and something in the set of her shoulders that told him she was carrying more weight than the physical kind, and managing both with the same quiet competence. He had been hired by the Mallory Ranch 5 miles east of town, and while the other hands had gone directly there, Callum had taken the longer route through town, because he always did in a new place. He liked to know the shape of a place before he had to navigate it in a hurry. What he had not expected was her. He came back the next morning. Clara heard the door at 6:45 and looked up from her accounts, and there he was, hat already in hand, the same steadiness in the eyes. "You're persistent," she said. "I liked the bread." He sat on the same stool. "And the coffee." "Coffee's gone already. I've got water." "Water's fine." She looked at him for a long moment. In her experience, men who came back a second day usually came back because they wanted something specific and were working up to asking. She had learned to wait it out. But Callum Reid sat on the stool with the patient stillness of a man who was simply there, because he wanted to be there, and after a while she turned back to her accounts and let him be. "Those your books?" he asked. "They are. You do your own accounting. Who else would do it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Fair enough." She heard him shift on the stool. She did not look up. Outside, the town was starting to move. She could hear the horses on the main street, the early morning calls between shopkeepers, the particular creak of the Miller boy's wagon that needed its left rear wheel looked at, and probably wouldn't be. "Can I ask you something?" Callum said. "You can ask." "How long have you been running this place alone?" Clara set down her pen. She looked at him with the direct look she had cultivated over years of being underestimated. 3 years, she said, "since my husband died." "You built it up alone." "I built it up before he died too." She picked her pen back up. "Robert wasn't much of a baker." Something moved in Callum's expression. It wasn't quite a smile, and it wasn't quite sympathy, and she found to her faint annoyance that she couldn't categorize it easily. What was he? He asked. She didn't answer for a moment. He was a man who meant well, she said finally. That's about as much as I've sorted out. Callum nodded like that was a complete and honest answer, which it was. He drank his water. He paid for 2 rolls and a small loaf of bread and left before the morning rush. And Clara watched him go through the front window and then turned back to her accounts and told herself that was that. It wasn't that. He came back Tuesday. He came back the following Thursday. He stopped in on a Saturday afternoon when the bakery was almost empty and offered without preamble to fix the hinge on her back door that had been catching wrong since February. I didn't ask for help, Clara said. No. He already had his knife out examining the hinge. But it's driving you to distraction every time you go through that door. I can see it on your face. She crossed her arms. You don't know what you see on my face. He glanced over his shoulder at her. You set your jaw and your left hand goes to your hip every time it catches. You've been managing it, but you're tired of managing it. Clara stared at him. The hinge had been catching since February. She had managed it. She had not mentioned it to anyone because mentioning small broken things had not ever in her life produced anyone who came and fixed them. Go ahead, she said, and walked back to the front counter and stood there with her hands flat on the wood and breathed slowly until the faint, inconvenient tightness in her chest went away. He fixed the hinge in under 10 minutes. He didn't charge her. He said goodbye with his hat in his hand and walked out, and the door swung clean and easy behind him, and Clara stood in the middle of the bakery and listened to the silence and felt for reasons she absolutely refused to examine, like crying. She didn't. She was organized. The problem with Willow Creek was that it talked. By the second week of May, it was known in the way that things became known in a town of 430 people, which was to say, universally and inaccurately, that the new Mallory Ranch hand had some kind of peculiar interest in the Whitfield widow. The theories varied. Some people thought he was after her property, small as it was. Some thought he was lonely and undiscriminating. Harriet Toombs, with her characteristic generosity of spirit, announced at the Ladies' Aid Society meeting that she felt genuinely sorry for the man, that he clearly didn't know anyone in Willow Creek yet, and that once he understood the situation, he would make better choices. Clara heard this from Margaret Solis, who ran the dry goods store and was one of the dozen genuinely kind people, and who delivered this information with the uncomfortable expression of someone who knew they were carrying something unpleasant, but thought the recipient deserved to know. I thought you should hear it, Margaret said, before it got back to you sideways. It's fine, Clara said, which was the answer she always gave. Clara. Margaret. She looked at her friend steadily. It's fine. He comes in for bread. People talk. They've always talked. Margaret put her hand briefly on Clara's arm. You deserve better than this town has given you. I'm doing all right. I know you are. I know you are. Margaret squeezed her arm once and let go. I'm just saying you deserve better than doing all right. Clara thought about that for a long time after Margaret left. She thought about it while she kneaded the next morning's bread. She thought about it while she balanced her books that night, the numbers precise and clean and entirely under her control. She thought about what it meant to deserve something, and whether deserving and receiving had any necessary connection to each other, and she concluded with the careful honesty she applied to everything that they didn't. Not automatically, not in her experience. And then she thought he fixed the hinge. No one in 3 years had fixed the hinge. She closed her book and went to bed and did not think about Callum Reid for the remainder of the night. She was almost entirely successful. He was at her door when she arrived to open at 6 the next morning. He wasn't knocking. He was sitting on the step with his back against the doorframe and his hat over his face and a brown paper parcel in his lap. And when her footstep hit the boards of the porch, he lifted the hat and looked at her without any particular evidence of embarrassment. You're sitting on my steps, she said. I am. He stood. He was, she noticed again, with the part of her mind that catalogued things, whether she wanted to or not, extremely tall. I brought something. He held out the parcel. Clara looked at it. She looked at him. What is it? Open it. She took it carefully. It was lighter than she expected. She unfolded the paper, and inside was a bolt of dark blue cotton, clean and good quality, the kind she hadn't been able to afford since the autumn. I don't take charity, she said immediately. It's not charity. He leaned against the porch rail with the ease of someone who had spent a great deal of time on porches. I need a shirt. You do sewing, I heard. I figured I'd pay for the fabric and the work both, and save us both the trouble of the dry goods store. Clara looked at the fabric. She looked at him. I haven't agreed to make you anything. No, he said. Will you? She stood there for a moment with the bolt of blue cotton in her hands, and the morning light just beginning to come over the rooftops, and something happening in her chest that she had no good word for. It wasn't hope. She had retired hope some years back. It was something more cautious than hope, more like the sensation of a door she thought was sealed, beginning very quietly to shift on its hinge. Come in, she said. I'll measure you. He sat on the stool at the counter while she measured. She worked in silence, which was her preference, and he sat in silence, which she noticed was also his. Most men in Willow Creek became uncomfortable with silence and filled it. Callum Reid let it sit. She measured his shoulders and wrote the number in her notebook. She measured from shoulder to wrist and wrote that down too. When she straightened up from measuring the breadth of his chest, an operation that required her to be briefly closer to him than was strictly comfortable, not because of him, but because of the strange warmth that proximity produced and which she refused to name, she found him looking at her with the steady, examining look she had noticed the first day. What? She said. Nothing. He looked down at the counter. You're very precise. Precision is the point. I know. A pause. I like it. She put the notebook down. She stood across the counter from him with her pen in her hand and looked at him with the direct look and said, Mr. Reid, I want to say something, and I'd appreciate it if you heard it cleanly. He met her eyes. I'm listening. People in this town talk. You've been in here enough mornings that they've already started, and I know what they're saying, and I know what they're implying about you and about me and about your judgment in spending time here. I want you to know that I am not asking you to stop coming in. You're a paying customer, and you're decent company, and the hinge needed fixing. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't know that there are easier ways for you to spend your mornings, and if you've been coming out of pity or out of some notion that I need, Clara. She stopped. He hadn't used her given name before. She hadn't told it to him, which meant he'd asked someone, or he'd heard it said. He said it quietly, without inflection, just the one word, and it stopped her completely. I don't do things out of pity, he said. I'm not built that way. I come in because the bread is good, and the coffee was good when you had it, and the company is good. And this is the only place in this town I've walked into where someone spoke to me straight. He picked up his hat from the counter. I'll come back for the shirt in 2 weeks if that works. It works, she said. He nodded. He put the hat on. He walked out, and the door swung clean and easy behind him, and Clara stood in the middle of the bakery with her notebook and her pen and the bolt of blue cotton on the counter, and breathed. It was on a Friday in the middle of May that Harriet Toombs walked into the bakery with her daughter Josephine and 3 other women. Clara was serving 2 other customers when they came in. She finished with those customers, and then she looked at Harriet Toombs across the counter. Mrs. Toombs, what can I get for you? Harriet took her time looking around the shop with the slow survey that implied everything fell short. 1 loaf. White if it's fresh. It's fresh. Clara turned to slice it. We saw your ranch hand friend this morning, Harriet said behind her in the tone of someone announcing the weather. Passing on the South Road. He's not my friend. Clara kept her back to them. He's a customer. Of course. Harriet's voice was warm with something that was not warmth. Well, he was speaking with Josephine's beau, and they seemed to get on very well. He's a striking-looking man. I'm sure. Josephine thought so too. A small laugh shared between the women. I told her a man of his sort would naturally seek out the more established families in time. It's only natural. Clara wrapped the loaf. She turned around. She set it on the counter and said, 4 cents. Harriet opened her purse with the air of a woman performing a favor. You know it is remarkable what you've done with this little shop. Given everything. Given what? The question came out sharper than Clara intended. The shop went quiet. One of the women behind Harriet shifted her weight. Harriet smiled. Given your circumstances, of course. Being alone, I only meant it's admirable. Thank you, Clara said, and her voice was entirely steady. 4 cents, Mrs. Toombs. There was a beat, a short one, but Harriet felt it, and then she set the coins on the counter and gathered her party and left, and the bell above the door said everything Clara didn't. She stood there for a moment. Then she went to the back room. She stood at the small window that looked out over the alley. She breathed. After exactly 4 minutes, she went back to work. She was closing up that evening when she heard the voices outside. She recognized one of them immediately. Dent Cooper, the second son of the Cooper family, who had too much of his father's cattle money and too little of his father's sense, and who had at various times over the past 3 years appointed himself to the project of reminding Clara Whitfield of her place in the social order of Willow Creek. The other voice she knew too now. She stayed behind the door. Heard you've been spending time over at the widow's place, Dent Cooper was saying. The words came through the gap at the door with the particular clarity of a man who wasn't worried about being overheard. The bakery. I have. Callum's voice was even. Ain't much to look at. Clara's hand went still on the door. The bakery's clean, Callum said. Good bread. Wasn't talking about the bakery. A pause. The sound of Dent shifting a boot scraping the boards. Look, I'm just saying. Town like this, a man who's new, he doesn't want to start on the wrong foot. Getting associated with certain situations. People have impressions. Do they? She's a widow. She's... Dent made a sound that Clara had heard aimed at her before a dismissive exhale, the specific vocabulary of a man who didn't need words to make his meaning plain. I'm not saying anything against her. I'm just saying you'd find better company if you were looking for it. Josephine Toombs is a fine young woman, pretty, well-connected. Her father would... I'm going to say this one time, Callum said, and his voice had changed. It wasn't loud. It was quieter than before, which was somehow worse the way a fire burns hotter when the wind stops feeding it. Because I think you're a man who can hear a thing and understand it. I choose my company. I've been doing it for 34 years, and I've gotten reasonably good at it. The next time you speak about Mrs. Whitfield in that tone, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation than this one. A silence. I was just trying to help, Dent said, and his voice had lost some of its sureness. I know what you were doing. The sound of footsteps. Good night, Mr. Cooper. Clara stood behind the door for a long time after she heard him walk away. The evening came through the gap in the frame dust and cooling air and the distant sound of horses on the main road. She stood there and pressed the back of her hand briefly to her mouth and waited for whatever was building in her chest to settle. It didn't entirely settle. She locked the door. She walked home through the side streets the way she always did, the longer way that went past the church and the old mill and added 4 minutes to the walk, but meant she didn't have to go down the main road at night alone. She sat at her table. She opened her book. She looked at the numbers without seeing them. 3 years of managing and organizing and being fine. 3 years of Harriet Toombs' particular genius for cruelty wrapped in concern, and Dent Cooper's entitled condescension, and the town's quiet collective assumption that Clara Whitfield was a woman to be pitied, to be worked around useful in the way that a piece of furniture is useful appreciated without thought, without acknowledgement. And now this man, this stranger from Colorado, who tracked mud across her floor and asked if she'd eaten and fixed the hinge without being asked, had stood in the street and spoken her name in that quiet, certain tone and meant every word of it. She closed the book. She sat in the quiet of her house, and outside the wind moved through Willow Creek the way it always did, indifferent to everything. She did not sleep well. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle, the creak of the floorboard by the window, the slow complaint of the kitchen wall when the temperature dropped. Sounds she had catalogued over 3 years of sleeping alone in a house that had always felt, even when Robert was in it, like a house waiting for her to figure out what she was doing there. She thought about the roll he had pushed to her side of the counter. It was a small thing. It was such a small thing. 2 cents of bread and a simple question, and she had stood there like it was the first time anyone had ever thought to ask. The truth was, she couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked. Not because no one had ever cared. Margaret cared. Margaret had always cared. But there was a difference between someone who cared about you from the outside and someone who looked at you straight and asked a direct question and waited for the actual answer. Robert had not been that kind of man. He had been a man of general goodwill and specific inattention, and she had learned early in their marriage to manage herself, to expect nothing, to call that arrangement fine, which she had done so long and so thoroughly that she had almost stopped knowing what she'd given up to make it work. She turned over. She looked at the ceiling. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the road. The wind had picked up, and the cottonwood tree at the corner of the yard was moving. She could hear it, the papery rush of the leaves she associated with late spring in Kansas, with the approaching heat of summer, with the year turning toward its longest days. She was not a woman who felt sorry for herself. She had decided that early after the funeral, after the root cellar, after she had stood up off that cold dirt floor and washed her face and gone back to the bakery. Self-pity was a luxury she could not afford and did not believe in. She had work. She had her books. She had a door that now swung clean on its hinge. But lying in the dark, she let herself ask a question she didn't usually ask. Not with bitterness, not with particular sadness, just with the honest curiosity of a woman who had been keeping her head down for 3 years and was beginning to wonder what she might see if she raised it. Was this the whole of it? She didn't answer herself. She was too honest for that. She knew she didn't know. But the question sat in her chest in the dark, alongside the memory of his voice in the street, saying her name to Dent Cooper in that quiet, certain tone. It was a long time before she slept. The next morning she was at the bakery at 4, same as always. She built the fire in the oven. She mixed the first batch of dough. She worked in the particular silence of that hour, when the town was still asleep, and she did not think about anything except the work, which was a discipline she had perfected and which served her well. At 6:30 the door opened. She didn't look up. "Coffee's ready." "Morning." His voice. The stool scraped. "You sleep?" She did look up then, because it was another one of his direct questions, and they still caught her sideways. He was watching her with his hat in his hands and something careful in his expression. "Some," she said. He nodded. He didn't push it. He poured his own coffee from the pot on the counter, which he had started doing 3 weeks ago without asking, and which she had not objected to, and he sat with it and looked at the counter. "I expect you heard us last night," he said. Clara set down her bowl. "I was closing up." "I expect you heard." She met his eyes. "I heard." He turned the cup in his hands. "I want to say I'm sorry you had to." "Don't." Her voice was even. "Don't apologize for what you said. I've heard worse said about me with considerably less response from anyone standing close enough to do something about it." Something crossed his face. He set the cup down. "That shouldn't be the case," he said. "No." She picked up the bowl again. "It shouldn't." They sat with that for a moment, the truth of it plain and unadorned, hanging between them in the morning air. Outside, Willow Creek was beginning to wake up. She could hear the first horses on the street, the sound of a shutter opening 2 buildings down. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "I want to ask you something. You can tell me to mind my business." "I generally do," she said. "I know." The corner of his mouth moved. "Are you all right?" It was the same question as the day before. It was the same question as the roll pushed across the counter. It was such a simple thing. 3 words, the kind of words people said every day without meaning them at all, and yet he asked it the way he asked everything, like he actually wanted to know the answer, and would sit there quietly until he got it. Clara looked at her bowl. She looked at her hands. She thought about the question she had asked herself in the dark last night about the whole of it. "I'm working on it," she said. It was the most honest answer she had given anyone in 3 years. Callum Reid picked up his coffee and didn't say anything else, and she went back to her dough, and the morning light came through the bakery window and spread across the clean floor. And the town of Willow Creek went on around them, the way it always did, not knowing or particularly caring about the 2 people inside the small bakery on the eastern edge, sitting in a comfortable silence that was, for the first time in a very long while, something Clara could not quite bring herself to call fine. She was 27 years old. She was organized. She was also beginning to understand slowly, carefully, with the same precision she applied to everything. That fine was a word she had been using for a very long time to describe something that was not in fact fine at all. And for the first time in 3 years, that understanding didn't feel like defeat. It felt like a door swinging open on a newly fixed hinge. The shirt was finished on a Wednesday. Clara had worked on it in the evenings after the bakery closed, and the accounts were balanced, and the town had gone quiet. She worked by lamplight the way she did everything precisely without waste, each stitch set where it was supposed to be, and not a fraction off. She was a good seamstress. She had always been a good seamstress. It was one of the things about herself she had never had reason to doubt, because the work either held or it didn't, and hers always held. She told herself she was not thinking about him while she sewed. She was not particularly convincing. He came in Thursday morning, same as always, and she had the shirt folded on the counter when he arrived. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands the way a person does when they are genuinely looking at something, not just being polite. He ran his thumb along one of the seams. "This is good work," he said. "I told you I sewed. You told me you did sewing. There's a difference." He looked up at her. "This is craftsmanship." Clara said nothing. She turned to pour his coffee and did not examine why the word landed in her chest the way it did, settling there with a small and unannounced weight. "What do I owe you?" he asked. She told him. He paid without negotiating, which was not what most people did, and he folded the shirt back with care and tucked it under his arm. "I'll wear it Sunday," he said. "It's your shirt. Wear it when you like." "I'll wear it Sunday," he said again, and there was something in the way he said it that she did not examine until much later, when she was alone, and the lamp was burning low, and she was almost honest with herself. He meant he would wear it where she could see it. She went back to her dough. Sunday came with the particular weight of Sundays in small towns. The church bells, the dressed-up families on the main road, the collective performance of respectability that Willow Creek mounted every 7 days with the dedication of people who needed it to mean something. Clara attended services the way she attended most social obligations, punctually, quietly, and in the 3rd pew from the back on the left side, which was her pew, and had been her pew since she was 17 years old, and which no one had ever questioned because the pew, like Clara herself, had become a fixture that people worked around without thinking about. She saw him before the service started. He was near the back, standing because the back rows were already full, hat in hand, the way men held their hats in church, and he was wearing the shirt. The dark blue cotton sat well on his shoulders. She noticed this the way she noticed everything, factually cataloging it, filing it away before she could prevent herself, and then she looked at the hymnal in her hands and opened it to a page that was not the right page, and spent the first 10 minutes of service staring at words she wasn't reading. He did not try to speak to her after. He nodded when she passed him in the aisle on the way out, a small, deliberate acknowledgement, nothing that anyone watching could have called significant. She nodded back. Harriet Toombs was watching. Of course she was. Ed. The trouble with Harriet Toombs, Clara had long ago concluded, was not that she was cruel. Plenty of people were cruel. The trouble was that she was organized about it. She gathered information the way a general gathers intelligence, and she deployed it at the moments of maximum effect with the patience of someone who understood that timing was everything. Monday morning, 8 o'clock, 2 customers in the bakery. Harriet walked in. "Good morning, Clara." She set her basket on the counter with the proprietary ease of a woman who had decided long ago that all spaces were hers until proven otherwise. "I saw you at service yesterday." "I'm there most Sundays." "Of course." Harriet smiled at the 2 customers, Mrs. Albright and young Pearson, who was collecting for his mother with the warm inclusivity of someone who wanted witnesses. "I saw the Mallory Ranch man there as well, wearing a very fine shirt." Clara wrapped Mrs. Albright's bread. "That'll be a nickel, Mrs. Albright." "A dark blue shirt," Harriet continued undeterred. "Quite well made. I said to my husband that looks like new work. Doesn't it, Clara? Doesn't it look like something you might have made? 2 cents for the rolls, Pearson." The boy handed over his coins and left quickly with the animal intelligence of a 12-year-old who sensed danger. Mrs. Albright, who was braver, or perhaps simply slower, stayed. "Clara." Harriet lowered her voice to the register she used when she wanted to sound concerned. "I only ask because people will talk. You understand. A widow taking commissions from a single man, that sort of arrangement, people draw conclusions, and I would hate for your reputation." Mrs. Toombs. Clara looked at her. "I'm a seamstress. I sew. That is the nature of a commission. If people wish to draw conclusions from a transaction that reflects on the quality of their minds, not the quality of my character. Is there something I can get you this morning?" Harriet Toombs blinked. It was a very small blink, barely there, but Clara had learned to read small things. "A loaf," she said. "White. 4 cents." The coins were counted out in silence. Harriet took the bread and left, and Mrs. Albright, who had been magnificently still throughout the whole exchange, let out a long breath and said, "Clara Whitfield, I have been waiting years to see that." "To see what?" "You not apologizing." Mrs. Albright picked up her basket. "It suits you." Clara looked at the door for a long moment after she left. Then she went back to work. That afternoon, Callum came by to return the tin plate she had sent the rolls home with 3 weeks ago and forgotten about. He set it on the counter and said he'd washed it. She said he didn't have to. He said it was the right thing to do. They regarded each other across the counter. "Someone gave you trouble this morning," he said. It wasn't a question. She wondered who he'd heard it from and decided it didn't matter because in Willow Creek things had a way of traveling. "Nothing I couldn't handle," she said. "I know." He picked up his hat and turned it in his hands, the thing he did when he was considering how to say something. "Clara, I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me true." "I generally do." "Do you want me to stop coming in?" She looked at him. He was watching her with the patient, direct attention she had come to expect, and there was nothing in his face she could call performance. He meant the question. He was asking it with the same careful honesty she had noticed from the first morning, and she understood with the particular clarity of a woman who had spent 3 years learning to read what people actually meant beneath what they said, that he would take whatever answer she gave and honor it without argument. That was the thing that undid her slightly. Not the asking, the honoring. "No," she said. He nodded once. He put the hat back on. "All right," he said, and that was the end of it, and she was grateful. And she was also, she noticed with some alarm, beginning to feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time, which was not precisely comfortable. But he asked her to walk with him a week later. He said there was a view of the creek from the mill road, and he hadn't found it, and she might know the way. "Flattery," she said. "Direction," he said. She went. She told herself she went because the bakery was closed Thursday afternoons, and she had already balanced the accounts twice. She did not examine the other reasons. They walked the mill road in the cooling afternoon, and Clara kept a proper distance, and he kept his hands to himself without apparent effort, and they talked. She had not expected the talking to be easy. It was. He asked about the bakery, how she'd started it, where she'd learned. She answered him the way she answered her books factually without embellishment. She had learned from her mother. 3 recipes, $4 a borrowed oven. That's simple, he said. Most things are. We complicate them later. What did your husband think of it? He thought it was fine, she said. He didn't see it. You understand. He saw that she ran a bakery. He didn't see what it cost, what it meant. What did it mean? It meant I was still here, she said. After everything, I was still here. The creek was exactly where she said it would be. He looked at it then, at her. Thank you, he said, for showing me. It's just a creek. It's not. He looked at her steadily. You know it's not. The first real trouble came in the second week of June. Clara had known it was coming the way you know weather in Kansas, not the exact hour, but the feel of the air beforehand, the particular pressure of something building. The something in this case was Thomas Garvey. Thomas Garvey owned the Mallory Ranch. Not Ran-owned. He was 53, red-faced, thick through the middle, accustomed to authority, the way men get when they've been the largest economic force in 3 counties long enough that people forget to question them. He came into the bakery on a Tuesday. Mrs. Whitfield, he said, which at least was that. Mr. Garvey. She looked at him across the counter. What can I get you? Nothing. He set his hat on the counter with the ease of a man who expected surfaces to be available for his use. I want to have a word. You're having one. He smiled, which did not warm his face. About my ranch hand, Callum Reid. Clara's hands were still on the counter. She kept them there. What about him? He's a good worker. Best I've had in years if I'm honest about it. I'd like to keep him through the season and into next year if he'll stay. Garvey looked at her with the measuring look of a man pricing cattle. What I don't want is distractions. Town talking. Ranch hands lose their heads over women, and next thing you know they're making errors on the job. Errors cost money. I don't see what this has to do with me, Mrs. Whitfield. He said it with a patience that was not patience. He comes here every morning. He's been seen walking with you. People talk, and when people talk it gets back to the ranch, and when it gets back to the ranch, it creates a certain... Mr. Garvey. She looked at him. She kept her voice even and her hands flat on the counter, and she used the voice she had developed for exactly these situations. Not loud, not angry, just clear the way the edge of a good knife is clear. Mr. Reid is a customer of this establishment. He buys bread. He has commissioned one piece of sewing. What he does with his own time and his own feet is his own business, and yours, by extension perhaps, but it is none of mine to control, and none of yours to ask me to control. Garvey looked at her for a long moment. I'm just asking you to be sensible. I am being sensible. I'm running a business. Sensible is exactly what I'm being. He picked up his hat. I hope so, he said, which was a threat with the edges sanded off, and she knew it, and he knew she knew it. He left. She stood at the counter and looked at the door and counted to 10 in her head, which was a thing she did. When she got to 10, she was still angry. She counted to 20. That was better. My time. She did not tell Callum about Garvey's visit. She told herself it wasn't his concern she'd handled it. It was done. The other truth was harder. She was afraid of what he would do. Not afraid of his anger, which she had learned was controlled and purposeful. She was afraid he would feel responsible. She was afraid he would think the right thing was to stay away. She didn't want him to stay away. She admitted this to herself one Thursday evening with the lamp burning and her books closed, and understood she had crossed a line inside herself that she would not be crossing back. He found out about Garvey anyway. Willow Creek. Being Willow Creek, it was only a matter of days. He came in on a Friday morning, and he was quieter than usual, which meant something because he was already quiet. He drank his coffee. He waited until the last other customer had left. Garvey came to see you, he said. He came to buy bread. Callum looked at her. He did not buy bread, she said after a moment. No. He set the cup down. I heard. She crossed her arms. I handled it. I know you handled it. You handle everything. He said it without sarcasm, which somehow made it land harder. That's not why I'm Clara, I'm sorry. He shouldn't have done that, whatever he said. It wasn't anything I haven't heard before. I know. His jaw tightened. That's what I'm sorry about. She looked at him. He was angry, she could see it in the set of his shoulders and the careful way he was holding himself still. But it was not anger at her. It was the other kind, the kind directed elsewhere, and she recognized it because she had felt it herself for 3 years and had learned to keep it very tightly contained. Are you going to say something to him? She asked. I already did. She blinked. When? Last night. He picked up his hat. He won't bother you again. She stood there looking at him and felt something shift in her chest. Not the small, careful shifts she had been feeling for weeks, but something larger, something that rearranged, and she had to look down at the counter for a moment to get herself settled. Callum, she said. He waited. You didn't have to do that. I know. It might cost you the job. I know that too. He said it without drama, without performance, with the same plainness he used for everything. It doesn't change what was right. She had no answer for that. She stood there with her hands on the counter and breathed. Thank you, she said finally. He nodded once, put on his hat and left. She watched him go through the window, the easy, unhurried way he moved the particular set of his shoulders, and then she turned back to her work, and she was not entirely all right, and she was not going to pretend she was. He did not lose the job. He told her Tuesday Garvey had been unhappy, but found losing a good worker more inconvenient than the discomfort of being disagreed with. He's going to watch, Callum said. Find reasons if he's of a mind to. Then we give him nothing to find. He looked at her. Is that what you want? To give him nothing to find? She understood the question under the question. I don't know yet, she said. Honest. The best she had. All right, he said, and picked up his coffee. What happened next, she did not expect. She expected the town to continue talking. She expected Harriet Toombs to find new angles. She expected the slow, cautious, unfamiliar thing happening between her and Callum to move at whatever pace it was going to move, which was slow because they were both slow. Careful people who had learned not to rush toward things that looked like they might be good, because good things had a way of not being what they appeared. What she did not expect was Eleanor Marsh. Eleanor Marsh was 71 years old and had lived in Willow Creek longer than anyone except possibly the creek itself. She was a small woman, thin with white hair, and the eyes of someone who had outlasted several opinions of herself. She had, as far as Clara knew, never had a word to say to her, which was fine, because most people in Willow Creek hadn't either. She came in on a Wednesday morning in late June alone and sat down on the stool at the counter and said, I want to talk to you if you've got a minute. Clara looked at her. I've got a minute? I'm going to tell you something, Eleanor Marsh said, and I want you to hear it from me and not from someone who'll wrap it in something it isn't. She folded her hands on the counter. I knew your mother. Did you know that? I didn't. Before you were born. Before she married your father and moved the family north. Eleanor looked at the counter for a moment, then at Clara. She was a fine woman, sensible, worked hard, too hard if I'm honest about it. Had a tendency to take care of everyone around her and forget to take care of herself. Clara was very still. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm 71 and I'm tired of watching people make the same mistakes their mothers made. Eleanor's voice was not unkind. It was just the directness of someone who no longer had time for anything else. I see you in here every morning, this shop, these books, this careful managing. I saw you at service on Sunday. I saw how you looked when you stopped looking at him, which was the same as how you look when you think no one is watching. She paused. Don't do what your mother did. What did she do? She said she was fine, Eleanor said, until she wasn't anymore. Clara looked at the counter for a long time. Outside, the town moved through its morning indifferent to the two women in the small bakery on the East End. He might leave, Clara said. It was the thing she hadn't said to herself yet, the thing she had been keeping in the back of the ledger in the column she didn't examine. Men like him, they move. That's the life. They ride for a season, they go somewhere else. They might, Eleanor agreed. And you might run a bakery alone for the rest of your life and be fine. Those are both true possibilities. She looked at Clara steadily. Question is, which possibility you're choosing, and whether you're choosing it or just falling into it because it's what you know. She slid off the stool. She was so small that the movement required a slight hop, which she accomplished with immense dignity. I'll take a loaf of that white bread, she said. And you can keep the change. Clara wrapped the bread. Eleanor Marsh took it and walked out, and the bell above the door rang once, and Clara stood at the counter in the silence she had built around herself like a house, and felt for the first time in a long time how the walls of it pressed. The 4th of July in Willow Creek was an occasion a speaker who talked too long food fireworks the Toombs family paid for and presided over with the satisfaction of people who confuse generosity with ownership. Clara went because she always went, because not going would have been noticed, and she did not give people things to notice if she could help it. She was at the edge of the gathering, near the Solace dry goods store with Margaret, when Callum found her. He came through the crowd without hurry, and found her in 3 minutes, which in a crowd of 400 people, she later thought said something about at least one of them. Evening, he said, and tipped his hat to Margaret, who was made of sterner stuff than most, but still looked slightly flustered. Evening, Mr. Reid, Margaret said, and excused herself with the transparent tactfulness of a good friend. Clara watched her go. She's not subtle. She's on your side, Callum said. That counts for more than subtle. They stood together at the edge of the crowd and watched the fireworks close enough that she was aware of him. The way you're aware of warmth from a fire not touching, not needing to just present. Between the things they said, there was the other kind of talking, the kind that happened in the pauses. Willow Creek applauded the last firework with wholehearted appreciation. And then Dent Cooper appeared from the direction of the drinking. He had been at the drinking for a while. This was apparent from the particular brightness in his eyes and the loose precision of a man who was concentrating very hard on appearing sober. He looked at Callum. He looked at Clara. He looked at the lack of distance between them. Well, he said with the unguarded honesty of a man who had drunk past his usual discretion. Suppose that answers the question everyone's been asking. Callum said nothing. What question is that? Clara asked. Whether the man had gone soft in the head or whether he knew something we didn't. Dent's gaze moved over her with the particular assessment that always made her want to take a step back, which she didn't. Can't figure which it is. Don't mean disrespect, ma'am, I just... Then I suggest you stop before you say something you mean, Callum said. His voice was quiet. It was very, very quiet. Dent Cooper heard it. Right, he said after a moment. Right. He touched the brim of his hat, which was a gesture that required him to focus, and walked away. Clara waited until he was far enough away. Does that happen often? People saying stupid things. You stopping them. He turned and looked at her. When it matters, he said. She looked at him, and she thought about Eleanor Marsh saying, "Don't do what your mother did," and she thought about the thing she had admitted to herself last Thursday, with the lamp burning and her books closed, and she thought about the particular terror of wanting something you couldn't account for in a ledger. "Callum," she said. He waited. He was always waiting, she realized. He had been waiting since April, patient as water finding its level. "I've been managing a long time," she said. "And I'm good at it. And I know how to do it. I know exactly how much effort it takes and what it costs and what it gives back, and I can balance it. I know how to balance it." "I know. I don't know how to balance this." She looked at him steadily because she had made herself a promise somewhere in those first awful weeks after Robert died that she would never again be a woman who couldn't look at a true thing directly. "I don't know what this is or where it goes or whether you'll still be in Willow Creek come spring. And I don't know how to put that in a column." He was quiet for a moment. The crowd was thinning around them, people drifting toward home, toward family, toward the ordinary end of an ordinary celebration. "Clara," he said, "I'm not asking you to put it in a column. I know." Her voice was steady. "I'm not sure I know another way." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Teach me your way. I'll learn it." She stared at him. "I mean it," he said. "I'm a reasonably quick study." Something happened to her face. She wasn't sure what, she only knew it from the way he looked at her when it did, with something open in his eyes that she hadn't seen aimed at her before. "That's a very foolish thing to say," she told him. "I've said worse." "I believe it." He smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile without reservation. Not the small controlled movements of the corner of his mouth, but something real, something that changed the whole arrangement of his face. She looked at it and looked away and breathed. "Go home," she said. "It's late." "Yes, ma'am." He put on his hat. He did not touch her. He did not need to. He turned and walked away through the dispersing crowd, and she watched him go and stood in the summer dark of Willow Creek and let herself feel for exactly the length of time it took him to disappear around the corner, the full weight of what was happening to her. Then she walked home. Quickly, because the feeling was large and she preferred to be inside with it. The letter arrived the first week of July. She almost missed it. It came in a bundle of post that had been sitting at the dry goods store for 3 days, and she might have missed it entirely if the name and the return address hadn't stopped her cold. James Whitfield, Robert's brother. She had not heard from James Whitfield in 3 years. Not at the funeral, not after it. He had written once in the weeks following Robert's death a brief formal letter of condolence, and that had been that. She had not expected anything further. She opened the letter at the counter of the bakery, alone after closing. James Whitfield, it turned out, had a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Hargrove, and his letter included with James's as a kind of official accompaniment, explained in the measured and circuitous language of men who charge by the word that there was a question regarding the deed to the bakery property. Robert, it seemed, had not owned the building free and clear, the way Clara had believed for 14 years. There was a note, a debt held originally by Robert's father and subsequently inherited by James, that gave James Whitfield a claim on the property if certain conditions were not met. The conditions had not been met. The note was due. She read the letter twice. She set it down on the counter. She picked it up and read it a third time carefully in case she had missed something, a date, a figure, a word that changed the meaning. She had not missed anything. She was by her reading about to lose the bakery. She sat down on the stool behind the counter, her stool, the stool she had stood behind every morning for 7 years, the stool in the bakery she had built from nothing and kept through widowhood and debt and the entire accumulated weight of Willow Creek's opinion of her, and she sat very still and breathed. She did not cry. She was organized. After a while, she got up. She locked the front door. She took the letter and her best lamp, and she went to her accounts, and she sat down and she opened the books, and she read them, and she added the numbers, and she looked at what she had, and what she owed, and what the note demanded, and the numbers were the numbers, and they did not lie. She did not have enough, not even close. She closed the books. She set her pen down. She looked at the lamp for a long moment. Then she picked up the pen again and started writing. Not to James Whitfield, not yet. She wrote down everything she knew about the note, the terms, the dates, the figures the lawyer had cited. She wrote down what she had. She wrote down the gap. She looked at the gap for a long time and tried to think of it as a problem with a solution, which it might be, or as a situation requiring management, which it definitely was. She was still sitting there when the light through the window shifted from black to gray. She had been there all night. She stood up. She put the kettle on. She looked at the gray light coming through the bakery window, and she thought, this is mine. I built this. 7 years of 4 o'clock mornings, and flour-dusted hands in precise columns, and this is mine, and I am not giving it to James Whitfield. The thought surprised her with its force. She hadn't known it was in her until it came out. She made the coffee. She built the fire in the oven. She started the first batch of dough for the morning pressing and turning and pressing in the old rhythm, and outside the town of Willow Creek, slept on, not knowing that the woman in the small bakery on the East End had spent the night figuring out what she was made of. She knew now. She knew exactly. She told Callum about the letter on a Friday morning. She had spent 3 days with the numbers, and the numbers kept coming back the same. On the 4th day, she set the letter on the counter between them without a word. He read it. He turned it over and read the second page. He set it down. "When was this note made?" he asked. 19 years ago. Robert's father signed it. It transferred to James when the old man died. And you didn't know? Robert never told me. She kept her voice even. I don't know if he knew. I don't know if it matters. What do you need? A lawyer, a real one, not Hargrove, who works for James. She had done little else but think about this for 3 days. Someone who can tell me if the note is valid, and if there are grounds to contest it. I have some put by, he said. No. The word came out before she could dress it. Callum. No. It's not charity, it's a loan. With terms. You can write them yourself. I run a bakery on credit from half the town. I am not adding your name to that list. Why not? Because if this doesn't work out, she said carefully, I want you on the other side of it, the same as you were on this side, without it being complicated. He was quiet. You're planning for me to leave, he said. Not accusatory, just reading it straight. I'm planning for every possibility. That's what I do. All right? He picked up his coffee. We find you a lawyer first. I know a man in Hayes City handled a contract dispute for Mallory 2 years back. He's straight. If you'll let me write to him. Write to him, she said. The letter went out Saturday. They heard back in 9 days, which was fast, and the man's name was Arthur Prentice, and he wrote in clear, economical sentences that Clara immediately respected. He wrote that the note as described might or might not be enforceable, and that this depended on several particulars he would need to examine in person, specifically the original document, the deed to the property, and any records Clara had of payments or acknowledgments made over the course of the marriage. She read the letter 4 times. The 4th time she started making a list. She had her accounts going back 7 years. She had the receipts from the property transfer. She had Robert's letters, not many but some from the early years. She pulled everything and laid it out on the bakery table after closing, and went through it piece by piece with the systematic thoroughness she applied to anything that mattered. On the 3rd night at nearly midnight she found something. It was in a packet of Robert's old papers, tax receipts, a few business records, a folded letter from his father that she had never opened because it was addressed to Robert, and Robert was dead. She held it for a moment. Then she opened it. Robert's father had written it 6 months before he died. It was 2 pages. It described the note. It also described a payment made by Robert's mother from her own money that had reduced the original debt to near zero. A fact that apparently neither son had been told. She read the letter twice. She set it down. She picked it up again. If the letter was authentic, James Whitfield's claim was built on a note that had been almost entirely paid off 20 years ago. She sat with that for a long time. Then she wrote to Arthur Prentice and described what she had found, and she asked him to come. She did not tell Callum about the letter from Robert's father. Not right away. She needed to be sure first old habit, the same one that made her balance her books twice. He came in Monday morning, and she was quieter than usual. Something's happened, he said. Something may have. I'm not certain yet. He did not push. She had come to rely on this, the particular quality of his patience, which was not incurious, but which trusted her to come to things in her own time. Arthur Prentice is coming, she said. Next week. Good news. Possibly. I found something in Robert's papers. I'm not ready to say more until I know what it means. All right. I know that's vague. Clara. He set down the cup. I've been coming in here since April. I know you don't say things until you know what they mean. I'm not going to ask you to start now. She thought this is what decent feels like. She had forgotten. Thank you, she said. Arthur Prentice arrived on a Wednesday. Clara locked the bakery at noon and sat down across from a thin, gray-haired man with ink on his fingers and the careful eyes of someone who had spent 30 years reading documents other people tried to make confusing. She laid out everything: James's letter, Hargrove's letter, the deed, her accounts, and the father's letter. Prentice read in silence. He did not narrate his reactions, which she appreciated. When he finished, he folded his hands on the table and looked at her. Where did you find this? He meant the father's letter, in a packet of Robert's papers. Has anyone else seen it? No. He tapped it once with one finger. If this is authentic, and I have no reason to believe it isn't, then the note as presented by James Whitfield's attorney represents a significant misstatement of the outstanding balance. At most, under a charitable reading of the law and the payment described here, James Whitfield is owed a very small sum. He is not owed this property. Clara's hands were flat on the table. She kept them there. That's what I thought it said. It says exactly that. Prentice looked at her steadily. You're going to need to get ahead of this. We need to respond before a formal claim is entered, and we need to do it with this document in hand. How quickly? As quickly as you can get to the county seat. I'll go Friday, she said. I'll prepare the documents today. She looked at him. I appreciate this, Mr. Prentice. Don't appreciate it yet, he said. Appreciate it when the deed is confirmed in your name. She almost smiled. Yes, sir. She told Callum that evening. He had come by in the late afternoon, as he sometimes did on Wednesdays, and found her at the back table with her papers and her lamp. She told him about Prentice. She told him about the father's letter and what it meant. She watched his face while she told him and saw something move through it, not surprise, but the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been waiting for a scale to right itself and was watching it happen. You found that yourself, he said, in Robert's own papers. 3 nights alone with those papers. I was thorough. He looked at her with something that went past the careful observing attention she had gotten used to, something that arrived somewhere else. Somewhere she didn't have a name for, but which made her look down at the table. Clara, he said. Don't. She kept her voice even. Don't make it into something it isn't. I looked through papers. Anyone would have. Not anyone, he said. Most people would have cried or given in or hired someone else to look. I'm not most people. I know. His voice was quiet. That's the point. She looked up at him. He was watching her with that open thing in his eyes again, the one she had seen at the fireworks, and she breathed and looked back at the table. I go to the county seat Friday, she said. I'll ride with you. You don't have to. I know. He picked up his hat. I'll ride with you. She didn't argue. They rode out at first light on a Friday in late July. Callum had cleared the day with Garvey. She didn't ask what that conversation had looked like. She had Prentice's documents in a borrowed leather case and the father's letter in her inside pocket, where she could feel it when she breathed. The county seat was 17 miles. They didn't talk much. She was going over arguments in her head. He rode beside her and let her think, which was one of the things she had come to understand about him. He knew the difference between company and interference. The clerk at the county recorder's office had the expression of someone who believed most visitors were wasting his time. I need to speak to the recorder, Clara said. The claim was filed by a James Whitfield against Lot 14 in Willow Creek, currently operating as a bakery. I have documentation that substantially alters the basis of that claim. She set the leather case on the counter. I need the recorder. He went through the back door without another word. Callum said nothing from behind her. The recorder was a heavy-set man named Barnes, who read everything with concentrated silence. When he looked up, he had the expression of a man revising an assumption. Where did you come by this letter, Mrs. Whitfield? My late husband's papers. Has anyone else seen it? My attorney, Arthur Prentice of Hayes City, reviewed it and will submit a formal affidavit. I have his written statement here. Barnes read Prentice's statement. He looked at the letter again. He looked at Clara. The Whitfield claim has not yet been formally entered, he said. It was submitted last week, and we were in the process of scheduling the review. He tapped Prentice's statement. This changes things considerably. I thought it might, Clara said. He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. You found this yourself, Mrs. Whitfield. In my husband's papers, yes. And brought it here yourself. Is there another way to bring something? She said, which was perhaps not the optimal response, but came out before she could stop it. Barnes looked at her steadily. Then something moved in his face that was close to respect. I'll need to notify the Whitfield party, he said. It may take some weeks to resolve formally. But on first reading, Mrs. Whitfield, your property appears substantially more protected than the Whitfield claim suggested. Clara heard this. She let it settle. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. They walked out together into the late morning. Well, Callum said. It's going to be all right, she said. The first time in 3 weeks she had believed it fully. He nodded. He didn't need to say anything else. What she did not anticipate was James Whitfield. James Whitfield arrived in Willow Creek on a Tuesday 3 days after the visit to the county recorder with Hargrove the lawyer and a second man in the kind of suit that didn't come from anywhere nearby. He installed himself at the hotel on the main road, and by Wednesday morning, the entire town knew he was there. Clara knew by 7 a.m. Margaret came in with her bread order, and her face arranged in the expression she used when she was delivering important news. She wished she wasn't. James Whitfield is at the hotel, she said. I heard. He's asking about you. What kind of asking? The kind with a lawyer sitting next to him. Margaret set her money on the counter. Clara, what is happening? Clara told her enough. Margaret listened, then said, What do you need? Nothing right now. Prentice is handling the formal response. James can't do anything until the recorder rules. Can he make trouble? People can always make trouble. It doesn't mean the trouble wins. Margaret looked at her. You're not frightened. I'm terrified, Clara said. But that's not the same as being stopped. James Whitfield came into the bakery Thursday morning. She had known he would. She had spent Wednesday evening making sure the counter was clean, and her good dress was ready because she understood that certain conversations required a certain armor. He was Robert's age, would have been mid-40s with Robert's coloring, and none of Robert's meanness and none of Robert's kindness either. Just a flat, acquisitive practicality that looked at things and saw what they were worth. Hargrove came with him. Mrs. Whitfield, James said. Mr. Whitfield. She looked at him across the counter. What can I get you? I think you know why I'm here. I think we can have that conversation like civilized people, or we can have it with the recorder present. Your preference. Hargrove made a small sound. James Whitfield looked at her with the expression of a man who had expected something easier than what he was finding. The note is valid, he said. The note as you presented it is not valid, she said. The payment made by your mother in 1863 reduced the outstanding balance to a fraction of what you're claiming. I have your father's own letter describing it. Your attorney has seen the preliminary documentation. A letter from a dead man. A letter in your father's hand, which can be verified, which Prentice has already taken steps to verify. She kept her hands flat on the counter. James, I am not going to give you this bakery. I built it. It is mine, and the documentation supports that. You're a widow, he said, and then stopped as if he had heard himself. Yes, Clara said. I am. What else? He was quiet. I don't know why you came here, she said, and her voice was clear as the edge of a good knife. Whether it was the money or something else, some old account between you and Robert that I was never told about. But I want you to hear me. This bakery is not Robert's. It was not your father's. It was built with my hands and my money and my 4 o'clock mornings, and there is not a court in Kansas that is going to give it to you on the strength of a debt that your own mother paid." The bakery was very quiet. Hargrove was looking at his hat. James Whitfield looked at Clara for a long time. Something moved in his face that she couldn't entirely read. A recalibration, maybe. A man who had looked at "Widow runs a bakery" and thought he understood the whole picture. "I'll need to speak to my attorney," he said finally. "Of course you will," she said. He left. Hargrove followed. The bell above the door rang once. Clara stood at the counter and breathed and felt the shaking start in her hands, which happened sometimes when she had been holding herself very still for a very long time. She pressed them flat on the wood and breathed until it stopped. 4 minutes. She was getting faster. She didn't know anyone had witnessed the conversation until Callum came in at noon. He had been outside. She understood this when she saw his face, the settled quality of a man who had been standing somewhere for a while and listening, and she understood that he had come in from the ranch specifically and had been on the other side of the door for most of the morning. "You were outside," she said. "I was. I handled it." "I know. You were going to come in. If you needed me to." He set his hat on the counter. "You didn't." She looked at him. "You came all the way from the ranch. It's 17 miles. It's not the moon." Something rose in her chest that she didn't have a name for more than gratitude and less than what it was going to be eventually, and she looked at the counter so he wouldn't see it. "I didn't cry," she said. "I know." "I wasn't going to." "I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. "Clara." She looked up. "You told him the truth and you held your ground and he left." His voice was straightforward, no performance in it. "That's not nothing, that's everything." She was 27 years old, and she had built this bakery with 3 recipes and $4 and a borrowed oven, and she had kept it through a marriage and a death and 3 years, and now this, and she was still here, and she was not going to cry. She cried. She turned around so he couldn't see her face, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and breathed carefully, and after approximately 30 seconds, she heard him not touching, not crossing any line, just there close enough that she could feel the presence of him, the way she'd felt it at the fireworks, warm and steady, and not going anywhere. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not normally Clara." His voice was quiet. "You don't have to explain this to me." She breathed. She straightened. She turned around and looked at him, and he looked back at her with the direct, careful look, and she thought about the morning he had pushed the roll across the counter and asked if she'd eaten, and she thought about the hinge and the blue cotton, and standing behind the door, listening to him talk to Dent Cooper in the dark. "I'm all right," she said. "I know you are." He picked up his hat. "You're also allowed to not be some of the time." The word came from Arthur Prentice 2 weeks later. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first described the formal response to James Whitfield's claim. The second described the recorder's preliminary ruling. The third said that in Prentice's professional judgment, the matter was effectively resolved, the note could not support the seizure of the property, and the Whitfield party had been so informed. James Whitfield had departed the county. Clara read the letter. She set it down. She read it again. She put her hand flat on the letter. She kept it there. This was hers. It had always been hers. But now it was proved. She heard the front door. She didn't have to look to know who it was. She had gotten to the point where she knew his footstep. She picked up the letter and walked to the front counter. He looked at her face, and he knew. "It's done," he said. "It's done." She set the letter on the counter between them. "Prentice says the claim is unenforceable. James is gone." Callum looked at the letter. He looked at her. Something settled in his face. Something held carefully in place for weeks, releasing which she understood because she felt the same release in her own chest. "Clara," he said. "I know." "No, I want to say something. And I want you to let me say it without you telling me it's fine, or that you handled it?" She was quiet. "I have been coming into this bakery since April," he said. "Because of the bread at first, and then not because of the bread. You know that. I think you've known it since the hinge." He paused. "I know you've been planning for every possibility, including the one where this goes nowhere. I know you're sensible and practical, and you don't put things in columns you can't balance." Another pause. "I am asking you to put this in a column." She looked at him. "That doesn't make any sense." "I know it doesn't. I'm a cowboy, not an accountant." The corner of his mouth moved. "I am telling you I want to stay. Not for the season. Past it. And I'm asking if you'd be all right with that." The bakery was quiet. Outside, Willow Creek went on entirely unaware. She could hear Mrs. Albright's front door 2 buildings down. The Miller boys' wagon with the bad wheel. She looked at Callum Reid, who had tracked mud across her floor in April, and asked if she'd eaten and fixed the hinge without being asked, and stood outside her door the morning James Whitfield came. She thought, "I have been managing alone for 3 years, and I am very good at it." She also thought he fixed the hinge. "Yes," she said. "I would be all right with that. Quite all right." He didn't say anything else. He didn't reach for her, didn't make any declaration. He simply looked at her with the full weight of the thing that had been building since April, and she looked back, and between them in the quiet of the small bakery on the east end of Willow Creek, something settled into place, the way a door settles when the hinge is right. "Good," he said. She went back to her dough. He drank his coffee. Outside, the day opened up ahead of them, like a road that neither one of them had had the map for, which was fine. Clara Whitfield had always been better at improvising than she let on. What she had not anticipated was that Willow Creek had been watching. The morning after Callum's declaration, Margaret Solis was on the step with a bunch of wild gathered asters and a face trying very hard not to be delighted. Eleanor Marsh saw his face when he came out. Margaret said, "She's been telling people since 1861 that the Whitfield girl was going to be all right eventually. She considers this confirmation." She was watching through the window. "She's 71. Margaret held out the asters. "These are from me. I've been waiting to have a reason to bring you flowers since the week after Robert died." Clara took them. Something went sideways in her chest, not because of Callum, but because of 3 years of mornings and a friend who had come in for her bread order and stayed. "Come in," she said. "I restocked the coffee." She put the asters in the tin pitcher she used for water. They were slightly wild and imperfectly arranged and entirely real, and she thought that was about right. It was Harriet Toombs who made it a problem again. It was always Harriet Toombs. What Harriet did was begin a campaign. No declaration. Just a word, here, an implication there, the question asked in the right company that assumed facts, not in evidence. She said only things that couldn't be directly contested, that Clara and the cowboy had gone to the county seat together, that he had been seen going into the bakery late on a Wednesday, that the whole property business had a convenient quality if you thought about it. Clara heard about it from Margaret on a Tuesday. She stood with the cloth in her hands and listened without showing anything on her face. "How many people has she told?" Clara asked. "Enough." "Is anyone believing it?" "Some." Margaret paused. "Clara, I know what I need to do." She went to find Callum. He was at the Mallory Ranch 5 miles out. She walked it. One of the other hands told her Callum was in the east pasture and went to get him. She waited at the gate. He came across the field toward her, and when he was close enough to see her face, he slowed for a fraction of a second, then came on. "Clara." He looked at her. "What happened?" "Harriet Toombs is telling the town a story," she said, "about you and me and the property business, what it looked like, what it might mean." He was quiet. "I know what she's saying, and so do you. And I know you'll want to address it, and you could probably—" "Clara." She stopped. "Tell me what you want to do," he said. She looked at him. This was the thing about him. Not that he always had the answer, but that he always asked the right question, and the right question was the one that put the answer where it belonged with her. She took a breath. "I want to go into town," she said. To the dry goods store, which at this time of day has approximately 20 people in it. I want to walk in there with you. And I want anyone who is wondering what the situation is between Clara Whitfield and Callum Reid to stop wondering." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face. "You're sure?" he said. "I am 27 years old, and I have been managing what this town thinks of me since I was 17, and I am done managing it. They can think what they like, but they are going to think it about the truth." He reached up and straightened his hat, which was already straight, a gesture she had learned to read. It meant he had decided something. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. "I need to tell buyers I'm leaving." She waited at the gate. August afternoon, the field quiet, and somewhere across the county, James Whitfield was gone, and the deed to the bakery was in the strongbox, where it had always been, and she stood with her hands easy at her sides and waited. He came back in 4 minutes. They walked into town together, and 5 miles felt like nothing at all. The dry goods store was exactly as populated as Clara had expected. Margaret Solis had the good sense to be behind the counter when they walked in, and the good sense not to say anything, and the good sense to look at Clara's face, and then look at Callum, and then look very deliberately at the ledger in front of her, as if it had become the most interesting thing in the room. There were 17 other people in the store, which was above average for a Tuesday afternoon in August, and every one of them went quiet in the way that people go quiet when something is happening that they have been waiting to happen for longer than they'd like to admit. Clara walked to the counter. She bought a spool of dark thread and 2 yards of muslin. She counted out the coins with the precision she brought to everything. Callum stood beside her. Not behind her. Beside. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He was simply there, hat in hand, standing next to Clara Whitfield in the Solis dry goods store on a Tuesday in August, and the entire town of Willow Creek understood in the way that towns understand things that the situation had been clarified. "Thank you, Margaret," Clara said. "Any time," Margaret said, and did not look up from the ledger, and her voice was absolutely steady, and Clara loved her for it. They walked out. The door closed behind them. On the porch in the late afternoon, Clara stood for a moment and breathed the dry Kansas air, and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since the first morning she had opened the bakery alone and decided that managing was the same as living. It wasn't the same. She understood that now. "Well," she said. "Well," Callum said. She looked at him sidelong. "That'll be all over town by supper." "I expect so. Harriet Toombs will have a great deal to say." "She's going to have a great deal to say regardless." He turned his hat in his hands, the gesture she had learned. "Does that bother you?" Clara considered this honestly. "No," she said finally. "I don't think it does." He nodded. He put the hat on. He did not touch her. He was still that careful, and she was still that careful, and they had arrived by different roads at the same understanding that the thing between them was real enough not to need rushing. "I'll come by tomorrow morning," he said. "Coffee'll be ready," she said. He tipped his hat and walked toward the ranch road, and she watched him go the way she always did. And then she turned and walked home through the town that was already beginning to talk, and she did not mind it, and that was new. What happened in Willow Creek over the following weeks was not a sudden shift. It was more like the gradual settling of a building after the foundation is properly laid, small adjustments, things finding their level, the whole structure arriving at a steadiness it had always been capable of, but hadn't quite achieved. People talked as they always talked. Harriet Toombs said several things, some of which reached Clara through Margaret, and some through Mrs. Albright, and some through Eleanor Marsh, who reported them with the dry precision of a woman who had outlasted more than one Harriet Toombs in her 71 years, and found them all equally tedious. What Harriet said varied. The through line was that Clara Whitfield had made choices of questionable judgment, and that things would end in tears, and that she herself had tried to warn people, but no one ever listened. Clara heard all of this, and none of it changed anything. What changed things, what actually measurably changed the temperature of the room when Clara walked into it, was the bakery, not the bread which had always been excellent, not the sewing. It was the morning 2 weeks after the dry goods store, when Mrs. Albright's youngest, a boy of 8 named Thomas, who had fallen from the Miller barn roof and broken 2 fingers, and burned his forearm on the stove in the same week, showed up at the bakery door at 7 in the morning with his arm wrapped in a piece of cloth that had not been changed in 3 days. Clara unwrapped the cloth, which was a bad idea, and looked at the burn, which was worse than she'd expected. "Where's your mother?" she said. "Sick," Thomas said. He had the stoic economy of a small boy who had learned not to complain. She said to ask Mrs. Whitfield. Clara looked at the burn. She looked at the boy. She put the kettle on. She spent 40 minutes cleaning and dressing the burn with the elderflower salve she kept in the back room, and had never mentioned to anyone because in her experience, people in Willow Creek were suspicious of anything they hadn't heard of before. The salve was her mother's recipe and came from her grandmother, and she had been making it since she was 12 years old. She bandaged it properly. She made Thomas eat 2 rolls and drink a cup of watered coffee because he had clearly not eaten, and while he ate, she wrote down instructions in the clean print she used for recipes. 1 step per line in the order Mrs. Albright would need to follow them. "Give this to your mother," she said. "Tell her to change the dressing tomorrow morning. Tell her to send you back if it gets hot or starts to smell wrong." Thomas looked at the bandage on his arm. He looked at the rolls. He looked at Clara with the unguarded sincerity of a child who has not yet learned to moderate admiration. "You're real good at that," he said. "My mother taught me," Clara said. "Now go home." He went. She did not think about it again until 3 days later, when Mrs. Albright came in up and moving, though still pale, and with the particular expression of a woman arriving to thank someone who would prefer not to be thanked, but is going to be thanked anyway. "Thomas told me what you did," she said. "I put a bandage on a burn. It wasn't—" "He told me what you did," Mrs. Albright said again firmly. "And I'm telling you thank you. And I'm also telling you that there is not one person in this town who could have done it better, and if any of them say otherwise, they can come and say it to my face." Clara looked at her. There was something in Mrs. Albright's face that she hadn't put there, something that had been gathering apparently without Clara's awareness. "You've been taking care of people in this town for 3 years," Mrs. Albright said. "The bread, the sewing, the accounts you keep for half the businesses on this road. Did you think we didn't notice?" "I was running a business." "You were running this town," Mrs. Albright said. "Some of us knew it. We just weren't loud enough about it." She bought her bread. She left. Clara stood at the counter for a long time after looking at nothing in particular, feeling the particular disorientation of a person who has been holding a very specific picture of themselves and has just been handed a different one. She told Callum about it that evening. He had taken to coming by in the evenings now occasionally when the ranch work was done and the light was still good. Not every evening, not so regular that it meant something she hadn't agreed to, which was his particular version of carefulness. He would come by, and they would sit on the porch step and talk or not talk, and then he would go and nothing was decided or rushed. She told him about Thomas and Mrs. Albright. He listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You know what you are to this town," he said. "I know what I thought I was." "What did you think?" She looked at her hands. "Useful," she said. "Convenient. The woman with the bread and the needle and the clean accounts. Something you work around." "What do you think I think you are?" she asked. It came out more direct than she intended, but she was tired of the indirect version of things. "I think you're the kind of person a place runs on," he said slowly. "Not the kind that gets credit for it, but the kind that if they left something essential, would go with them, and nobody would know why the place felt different." He looked at her. "I think Willow Creek doesn't deserve you. I also think you've built something here that matters because you made it matter, and you shouldn't have to leave to get the credit for it." She stared at the step between them. "That's a very large thing to say," she told him. "I know." He picked up his hat. "I mean all of it." She watched him walk down the road in the late summer evening, and she stayed on the step for a long time after he turned the corner, looking at the sky going from gold to dark, thinking about what it meant to be seen. Not pitied, not managed, not worked around. Seen. The letter she had not expected came on a Thursday. Not from James Whitfield, that was finished. This letter was from Denver, from a woman named Helen Marsh, who worked for a charitable organization that supported widows in the Western Territories, and who had, it seemed, been told about Clara by someone whose name she did not give. The letter asked if Clara would be willing to speak to other women in the region about managing a business alone. It asked if she had ever considered teaching what she knew about accounts and contracts and legal documents to women who found themselves in situations similar to hers. Clara read the letter 3 times. She had never been asked something like this. In her whole life, through the marriage and the bakery and the 3 years and all of it, no one had ever asked to learn what she knew. People took what she made. But what she knew, the actual substance of what she had learned about running a business and keeping books and navigating contracts and not losing what was hers, that had always been just hers. The equipment she used to keep herself standing, the idea that it could be something else, sat in her chest with a strange and unfamiliar weight. She wrote back to Helen Marsh. She said she would consider it. She said she would like to know more. She folded the letter and put it in the inside pocket of her good dress, where she had kept the father's letter, and she went back to work. Odd. She didn't tell Callum about the Denver letter right away. Not because she was hiding it, she just needed to sit with it. It was doing something to her picture of herself, not the picture Mrs. Albright had offered, not the picture Callum had offered, but something that came from the center of the thing. She had thought she was surviving. She was beginning to understand she had been building something. She told him on a Tuesday evening on the porch step. She read him parts of the letter. He listened without interrupting. "Are you going to do it?" he asked. "I'm thinking about it." "What does thinking about it feel like?" She considered the question seriously. "It feels like standing in the doorway of a room I didn't know was in the house," she said. He was quiet. "That's a yes," he said. "I didn't say yes." "No, but that's what it is." She looked at him. He was watching her with the look that had no performance in it, the look that went straight to the thing and stayed there. "You know what the hardest part is?" she said. "Tell me." "It's not the teaching. I know how to do the work. It's—" She stopped, started again. "For 3 years I told myself the managing was enough. That being competent and careful and useful was enough. That not needing anything from anyone was a kind of strength." She paused. "It is a kind of strength, but it's not the only kind." He looked at the road for a moment, then back at her. "What's the other kind?" "Letting people need you back," she said. "And letting yourself need them," he said quietly. "Yes." The evening went on around them. Somewhere a screen door banged. The cottonwood at the corner moved in what was left of the afternoon wind. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "I need you," he said. "For what it's worth. I am telling you that plainly because I think you deserve plain things, and you have had enough of people who said things sideways." He held her gaze. "I need the bread, yes. And the coffee. And the company. And the particular way you tell Harriet Toombs 4 cents in the voice. That means you have already won the argument before it started." He paused. "And everything else." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the morning in April with the rain and the roll pushed across the counter. The hinge. The father's letter. James Whitfield leaving. Thomas with his burned arm eating rolls at her counter. The Denver letter in her inside pocket. She thought about the room she hadn't known was in the house. "Callum," she said. "Ma'am?" "Stop calling me ma'am." Something shifted in his face. "Yes, Clara. That's better." She looked at the road. She breathed. "I'm going to write to Helen Marsh and tell her yes. And I'm going to need help not with the accounts, I can do those myself, but with other things I haven't figured out yet." She paused. I'm also going to need someone who comes by in the evenings and doesn't require anything complicated and is content to sit on a porch step and not say very much. I can do that, he said. I know. She looked at him. I'm telling you that I want you to. He looked at her with the open thing in his eyes, the thing she had finally stopped looking away from. All right, he said. All right, she said. They sat on the porch step in the late summer evening, not touching, not needing to, and beside them was the thing they had both just said, which was not small, which was in fact the size of the rest of both their lives, though neither of them put it in those words, because neither of them was that kind of person, and they had between them said everything that needed saying. There was one more thing. It happened 2 days later on a Thursday morning when the bakery was full. Mrs. Albright and her Thomas the Pearson boy, Margaret, and 3 other women whose faces Clara read the way she had always read them carefully for what was underneath. Harriet Toombs came in. She came in alone, which was unusual. She came in without her basket, which was more unusual. She stood at the counter and looked at Clara with an expression Clara had never seen on Harriet Toombs's face before, the expression of a woman who has been carrying something for a while and has decided to put it down. The bakery went very quiet. Mrs. Whitfield, Harriet said. Mrs. Toombs, what can I get you? Harriet looked at the counter. She looked at Clara. She said, I owe you an apology. Nobody in the bakery moved. Clara kept her face neutral and listened. I have said things that were not kind, Harriet said. I have said them for reasons I am not proud of. My husband has not been well for some time, and I have found that when things frighten me, I look for things that seem manageable. And you? I seemed manageable, Clara said. Her voice was even. You seemed certain, Harriet said quietly. You always seemed certain. And when things are not certain at home, a person... She did not finish the sentence. Clara looked at her. At the woman who had said, no man in this county would take that on, and given your circumstances, and a dozen other things that had each found the particular crack they were aimed at. She thought about what it cost to come in alone without the basket and say this. I appreciate you telling me, Clara said. Harriet looked at her. She seemed to have expected more or possibly less. That's all, Clara said. 2 cents for the rolls if you'd like them. No charge for the apology. Something moved in Harriet Toombs's face. Relief, maybe. Or the beginning of something different. 2 rolls, she said. Please. Clara wrapped them. Harriet paid. She left and the bell above the door rang once, and the bakery exhaled. Margaret looked at Clara with the look of someone who has just witnessed something significant and is deciding what to call it. Well, Margaret said. Well, Clara said. She went back to her dough. She told Callum that evening. He listened, and when she finished, he was quiet for a while. How did that feel? He asked. Like closing a ledger, she said. You add up the column, get the number, write it down, put the book away. It doesn't undo what's in the column, but you're not carrying it anymore. He looked at her. That's one of the things I love about you, he said. He said it the way he said everything, plain, without performance, without checking first to see if it would land right. He just said it, and then looked at the road, and the word was out there in the air between them, fully said, and he didn't take it back or explain it or ask what she thought about it. She looked at the road too. You're going to make me say something back, she said. I'm not making you do anything. You know what I mean. He turned to look at her, and there was the corner of his mouth moving just barely. Only if you want to, he said. She sat with that, with the choice which she was not accustomed to having, which was still the thing about him that caught her by surprise. That he gave her choices, put them in her hands, and stepped back and let her hold them. I love the way you sit on my porch step, she said finally, and the way you fix the hinge, and the way you stood in the street and told Dent Cooper that the next conversation would be different, and the way you came 17 miles to stand outside my door when James Whitfield came in. She looked at the road. And I love that you let me figure things out in my own time, even when I know you've already figured them out in yours." He was quiet. "That's not small," she said. "No," he said, "it isn't." They sat together on the step in the evening air, and the summer was moving toward fall, and the cottonwood tree at the corner was beginning to go yellow at the edges, and nothing was decided yet, not formally, not in the way of spoken agreements and written terms, which was the kind Clara usually preferred. But she thought they were getting there. She thought they had in fact been getting there since April, since the morning it was raining, and he tracked mud across her clean floor and set a roll on her side of the counter and asked a question that was 3 words long and meant a great deal more than 3 words. She thought the rest could wait. For the first time in 3 years, Clara Whitfield was not managing toward a destination. She was simply living in the direction of one which was different, and which felt she discovered like a door swinging open on a well-made hinge. The kind that doesn't catch. The kind that holds. Fall came to Willow Creek the way it always did, not all at once, but in small surrenders. One morning she opened the bakery before dawn, and the air had that particular bite that meant summer was done, arguing, and had packed its things and left. She built the fire in the oven and stood with her hands out to the warmth, and thought, "This is the 6th autumn I have done this alone." Then she thought, "This is the last one." Not because anything had been formally decided, not because any agreement existed in writing, which was still the form she trusted most, but because she knew with the certainty she brought to a column of numbers that was going to come out right, that something had been decided, the way certain things get decided, not in a single moment, but across 100 mornings and 100 evenings until the thing was simply true. She went back to her dough. The letter to Helen Marsh went out the first week of September. Clara had written 4 drafts and burned 3, not because the words were wrong, but because she kept making them too careful, too managed. The 4th she wrote in one sitting at the counter after closing it, said what it meant without apology. She told Helen yes. She told her she had been keeping accounts and managing a business alone for 7 years, and had in the course of defending that business from an unjust legal claim, learned things about documents and deeds and the ways women could be maneuvered out of what was theirs if they didn't know to look for it. Helen Marsh wrote back in 2 weeks. Practical and warm in equal measure, with 3 names of women in 2 counties who had asked for exactly this kind of help, and an invitation to a November gathering. She read the letter twice. She felt something in her chest she had not felt in so long she had to think before she named it. Purpose. The kind that goes past getting through and into going somewhere. She put the letter in the strong box with the deed. She told Callum about the November gathering on a Wednesday evening, the first cold evening of the fall, when they sat on the porch step with their coats on, and the sky was the particular dark blue of early October. He listened. When she finished, he said, "How long will you be gone?" 4 days if I go by rail. There's a line to the county seat and then the stage to Hayes and the rail from there. She paused. I'll need to ask Margaret to manage the bakery. She'll do it. I know she will. Clara looked at the dark road. I've never left Willow Creek, not since I came here with Robert 14 years ago. He turned to look at her. Are you frightened? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. I think I should be, and I'm not. Is that strange? No. He was quiet for a moment. It means you're ready. She looked at him sidelong. You're very certain about things you can't know. Some things I can know. He turned his hat in his hands. You walked 5 miles to the Mallory Ranch to settle something with Harriet Toombs. You went to the county seat with a dead man's letter and came out with the deed in your name. 4 days on a stage isn't going to be the thing that stops you. She looked at the hat turning in his hands. You're going to miss the morning coffee, she said. I'm going to miss the morning coffee, he agreed. That the simplicity of it, the honesty of it, the fact that he said it without dressing it up, settled in her chest the way the right things always settled. I'll come back, she said. I know, he said. Hey. Before November came, something happened that Clara had not planned for and could not have predicted. Garvey fired Callum. Not for the thing with James Whitfield. What Garvey did was simpler. He told Callum in October that the ranch was reducing its operation for the winter, that he could only keep 2 hands through the cold months, and that Callum was the most recent hire and therefore the first to go. He said it without malice. He paid what was owed. He shook Callum's hand. Callum came into the bakery the next morning and told Clara. She set down her pen. When, end of the week. She thought about what this meant in the practical terms she always returned to first. Then she thought about what it meant in the other terms, the ones she was still learning to use. What it meant there was larger and less manageable, and she understood it, but could not immediately say it. "What will you do?" she asked. "I've been thinking about that." He sat on the stool. "There's a livery on the west end of town that Holt wants to sell. He's going to his daughter's family in Missouri. Price is fair." Clara stared at him. "You're thinking of buying Holt's livery?" "I've been thinking about it for a while." He met her eyes. "Since about July, if I'm honest. You said you wanted to stay past the season." "I meant it. A livery is not past the season," she said. "A livery is a business. A livery is—" She stopped. "How much?" He told her the figure. She thought about what she knew about livery operations. She had kept Holt's books for 2 years and understood his margins and his debts. She thought about Callum's savings, which she could estimate. "You'd need a loan," she said. "I have a lead on one." "From where?" "Atchison and Sons in the county seat. I was going to ask if you'd look over the figures first." He turned the hat in his hands. "You know Holt's books. You know what the business actually looks like. I'd trust your read on it before I trust anyone else's." She sat for a moment with the fact of being asked. Not for her money. For her knowledge. Her specific competence, the thing she had built and kept, and never quite believed anyone would want from her except incidentally. "Bring me the figures," she said. He had them with him. Of course he did. She spent 2 hours going over them at the counter while he sat on the stool and drank coffee and did not talk unless she asked him something. When she was done, she looked up. "The margins are tighter than they look. Winter will be slow. You'll need to build the boarding side horses, staying not just shoes. There's room for it if you're willing to put in the work first year. I'm willing. The loan figure is about right for what the bank will bear against the collateral." She looked at him. "You'll need a co-signer or a strong reference from someone with established credit in the county." "I was going to ask Margaret." "Margaret's credit is good. Mine is better. I've been doing business in this county for 7 years, no outstanding debts, and Arthur Prentice can speak to the property situation." He was quiet for a moment. "You'd do that." "I'm offering," she said. "You can say no." "Why would I say no?" She looked at the counter. "Because it complicates things." "Clara." He said her name directly without preamble. "You know what complicates things, things worth having. Things you're afraid to lose. Things that matter." He paused. "I'd like to be complicated." She looked up at him. He was watching her with the open, patient look, and she thought about a year ago, before April, before the rain, before the mud on her clean floor. She thought about sitting in the root cellar after the funeral, crying for the emptiness of the arrangement, crying for the years of fine. She thought, this is not that. "I'll write to Atchison and Sons," she said, "and I'll include a letter from Prentice." He nodded. He did not say thank you, which she appreciated because it wasn't a favor, and they both knew it. She went to Denver in November. Margaret managed the bakery with the competence of someone who had been watching Clara do it for 3 years and had absorbed more than she knew. Callum drove her to the rail station now, something he could do with the wagon he had purchased along with Holt's livery. The sale had gone through in the second week of October, the loan the week after, and on a Friday morning, Clara had stood in the doorway of the livery and watched Callum Reid take the keys from old Holt's hand, and she had felt something she couldn't put in a column and didn't try. At the rail station, he helped her with her bag, which she did not need help with, and accepted anyway. 4 days, she said. "I know." He looked at her. "You're going to do something real good there." "I'm going to try." "No." His voice was quiet and certain. You're going to do it. You know you are. He looked at her for a moment longer. Come back. I will, she said. He tipped his hat. She got on the train. She sat with her bag in her lap and watched Willow Creek fall away the water tower. The church steeple, the cluster of rooftops, she had looked at every morning for 7 years, and felt the train moving and thought about what it meant to leave a place willingly. She had thought she would feel smaller going somewhere she didn't know. She felt the opposite. The gathering in Denver was in a meeting room above a dry goods store which Clara thought was appropriate. 11 women. They ranged in age from 22 to 67. 4 counties, their situations varied. Widow, abandoned wife, single woman running a family operation after a father died. But the through line was the same. All managing alone. All without the knowledge that would make the managing less dangerous. Clara stood at the front of the room and thought, I know these women. I have been these women. She started talking about accounts. They leaned forward. She understood something she had not understood before. She had thought her story was about survival. It was about transmission, taking what you learned the hard way and putting it in someone else's hands so they didn't have to learn it the same way. She talked for 2 hours. Questions for an hour after. 3 pages of notes in her neat hand. A list of follow-up letters to write, and the particular exhaustion of someone who has spent everything and doesn't regret a cent. Helen Marsh sat across from her when the room emptied. You've done this before, she said. No, Clara said. I've wanted to. There's a difference. Not much of one in your case. Helen looked at her steadily. There are women in 3 more counties. How often can you do this? Clara thought about the bakery, and Margaret, and the livery, and Callum saying come back like it was a fact rather than a wish. 4 times a year, she said, to start. Good, Helen said. That's enough. She came back on a Thursday. Callum was at the station. She had not told him which train, only the day. He was there when she stepped off, hat in hand, standing in the same easy way he stood in everything. And when she saw him, she felt something she was past trying to name something that was just the fact of him. How was it? He said. Good. She looked at him. Very good. I'm going back in February. I know, he said. I didn't tell you February. No, but you have the look. What look? The look you get when something's been decided. He picked up her bag. Same look you had when you told me you were going to write to Helen Marsh. Same look when you were going over Holt's figures. He turned toward the wagon. It's a good look. They walked out. The November air was cold and clean, and the prairie stretched out indifferent and enormous, which was the thing Clara had always found honest about Kansas. Callum, she said. Clara, I want to ask you something. Ask? She watched the road for a moment. Why did you stop in April at the bakery, when you could have gone straight to the ranch like the others? He was quiet for a beat. I smelled the bread, he said. That's not all of it. No. He looked at the road. I saw the sign in the window. The hours. 6 days a week, open before sunrise. He was quiet. I've worked for a lot of people. I know what it looks like when someone is carrying something alone. I wanted to see who was inside. She looked at him. And you told me you were the woman who ran the place. He let that sit. Not the widow, the woman. She had not remembered that he'd noticed the distinction. She had not realized until now that he had been noticing since before she had. The coffee was also excellent, he said. I was out of coffee that morning. The water was excellent. She laughed. It came out before she could manage it. Not a small, careful laugh, but the full version, the one she hadn't used in a very long time. And it surprised her, and apparently surprised him too, because he looked at her with something unguarded in his face. Just happiness, plain and uncalculated at the sound of her. She looked at the road and breathed, and felt the laugh still in her chest. I want to propose something, she said. He looked at her. A formal arrangement, she said, between us. Terms to be negotiated, reviewed annually. He was quiet for a moment. "What kind of arrangement?" "The permanent kind," she said. "If you're amenable." He looked at her for a long time. Then, "I've been amenable since June." "June?" "The evening we walked the mill road." He looked straight ahead. "I knew then." "You didn't say anything." "You weren't ready. I could wait." She sat with that, the image of him knowing since June, and saying nothing, coming by in the mornings and the evenings, fixing what broke, standing outside her door, when James Whitfield came driving her to the station, being at the station when she came back. All of it patient, all of it certain, all of it waiting for her to come to it in her own time. "Callum," she said. "Clara." "I'm ready now." He reached over. He took her hand. He held it the way he did everything, without performance, without excess, just completely, and she let him. And they rode the rest of the way to Willow Creek, holding hands in the November cold, and the town came into view ahead of them, the water tower and the church steeple and the cluster of rooftops she had looked at every morning for 7 years, and it looked different now, or she looked at it differently, which was the same thing. They were married in December in the Willow Creek Church on a Thursday, which Clara had chosen because Thursdays were the days things changed. Margaret stood with her. Eleanor Marsh sat in the front pew and cried, which she denied afterward, and which everyone had seen. Thomas Albright showed up in his good shirt and stood near the door with his arms crossed like a small serious sentinel, and received 2 rolls by way of thanks, and considered himself adequately compensated. Harriet Toombs attended. She sat near the back. Her face for once was just a face. The ceremony was short and plain and entirely what Clara had wanted. The vows were the ordinary ones. She said them in the clear, even voice she used for things that were true and that she intended to keep. Callum said his with the same directness he had brought to everything since April, without performance, without hedging, with the particular weight of a man who means what he says and has always meant it, which she knew, which was why she was here, which was the whole of it. Afterward, in the bakery, which Margaret had decorated with sprigs of dried sage and a canopy of white ribbon that was perhaps more elaborate than Clara would have chosen, but which she found when she arrived and saw it, that she was glad, for they had bread and coffee, and the kind of warmth that comes from a room full of people who are genuinely happy about a thing. Arthur Prentice had come from Hayes City, which she had not expected. He shook her hand and looked at her with the considering look of a man who understood that what had begun as a property dispute had become something he was glad to have been part of. "I was right," he said. "About what?" "The deed." He looked at her. "Appreciate it when the deed is confirmed in your name." "The deed is confirmed," she said. "More than one of them," he said, and lifted his coffee cup, and she understood what he meant and lifted hers. That evening, after the guests had gone, and the ribbon came down, and the last of the bread had been eaten, and Margaret had gone home with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for this for a very long time, and finds the reality entirely satisfying. Clara sat on the porch step. Callum sat beside her. December air, both of them in their coats. He took her hand. She let him, which still had the quality of a choice, even though she knew it was the right one. And she thought that it might always have that quality, which was something she had not expected, and which she found she was glad for. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "The morning you came in, the first morning, April, when you asked if I'd eaten." He waited. "I had been awake since 4, she said. "I was hungry. I was so tired I was almost past tired. And you walked in and asked me that question, and I told you I was fine, which was what I always said, and you pushed that roll across the counter, and I stood there, and I thought—" She stopped. "What did you think?" "I thought someone just asked." She kept her eyes on the dark road. "Not managed me, not needed something from me, not worked around me. Just asked. And then didn't wait for the right answer. Just put the roll there." He was quiet. "That's a small thing to change everything," he said. "That's how it works," she said. "Usually." He looked at her. "Clara." "Callum." "You've never been fine," he said. "Since the day I walked in. You've been a great deal more than that." She looked at the road. She breathed the cold December air. Outside Willow Creek settled into its evening the sounds of a Thursday night, the distant light of the Miller boarding house, and the lamp in the window of the livery that was now Callum's livery, and had his name on the sign, and would, she had already decided, be run with the same precision she brought to everything she touched. She was 28 years old. She was not fine. She was better than fine, and she knew the difference now, and the difference had a name, and was sitting beside her on the step, with her hand in his. And she thought, you are not too much. You were never too much. You were simply waiting for someone who could see all of you and not look away. She had found him in the rain in April, on an ordinary Thursday morning, when she was tired and hungry and managing everything alone, and he had walked in and tracked mud across her clean floor and asked the simplest question in the world. And this, all of this, the bakery and the hinge and the deed and Denver and December and the hand in hers, this was the answer. She was here. She had always been here, and she was not going anywhere.